Thank you. Ooh. This is Snøhetta, the mountain. It's 2,286 meters tall. And what could happen to have a name of a mountain become the name of an architect office? It's a very stupid story, and it was the first office Snøhetta had in downtown Oslo. And that was on a loft on the upper part of the building. At the first floor is a very, very, very brown bar called Dovrehallen, the Hall of Dovre. This mountain area, it's called Dovre in Norway, and on the top of the mountain lies Snøhetta, which means snow cap, which means that it's always snow on the top. So we named the mountain at the top of Dovre, the plain, and a brown bar. I'm going to talk urban talks today, and I thought the title is super exciting because then I can talk about whatever I like. And I want to talk about a lot of Snøhetta's projects and trying to explain a little bit the way we work, how we work with concepts. And I'm going to show you tons of images to tell you maybe a little bit different stories about the project. So here we go. Snøhetta consists of many offices. The two main offices is in Oslo, 120 people, 60 people in New York. We have 8 people in San Francisco, 30 in Innsbruck, 15 in Paris, 15 in Hong Kong, and we have 5.5 persons in Adelaide. And we do projects all over the world. We really started from day one to work internationally, to make international competitions. And of course, we want to have dots all over. We really miss a real Snøhetta dot in the Czech Republic, so we're ready for that. If you go on Google Earth, you can easily find where we have our offices. We have the one office, this is here, Skur 39 in Oslo, and thanks heaven for Google Earth, you see it's the same scale, the tip of Manhattan, 80 Pine Street, where we have the two main offices. So we're looking into Google Earth to find new places where you can have same kind of offices around the world. Every year we try to climb the mountain, or at least every second year, and then we take everybody up in the mountain and do the climbing. It's actually a pretty tough climb, and we also then gather in Tverrfjellhytta, the Wild Reindeer Centre. And last year we thought that we can't really fit 120 people in there. It's actually meant for 40 people, but we actually stuck everybody in there, and then we are inside this frame. But much more important, I think, for Snøhetta is that to really think outside of that. We are really team-based, and it's really important for us to work interdisciplinary. We're about 50-50 men and women, maybe 30 different nationalities, so people come from all over the world, and we are getting together with this holy mountain that we really love to work to make architecture. This is our office in downtown Oslo. It's one big space, 1,600 square meter. All is shared space. So you really, I mean, you can both cry and you can laugh a lot, but you have to share your ideas. This is very important for us because it's team-based. And this is my colleague Rob that made a map day at the office. Maybe it looks a little bit more like kindergarten with a yellow group and a blue group and a green group. It's how exactly then we work with different projects. And then we wander around because we're not stuck in one project. And the most important is that you pass by one of your colleagues and you ask, what are you working on? Or why is this pink color there? Or what are you doing this? It's about sharing ideas. What of course is lacking here, there is no coffee machine. Because we know that's where the most important place is in the office, and that's also where you meet people. So this is how we then share our ideas and how we are structured, and it's all about the people. We're not named after anybody. We're named after a landscape, a mountain, and a brown bar. But it's really the mind that counts. So we are very picky when we are picking our people, because they have to be generous. They have to be wanting to be part of a larger group, and it's about the identity to Snøhetta to make the team work. So being singular in the plural is important to us. So also what we like to call is transposition, because it started with architects and landscape architects together. We got interior architects, then we got graphic designer, product designer, we have also artists. And then we started to work also, we wanted to invite the clients. And then we talked about transpositioning, about changing roles to make the make the client be the interior architect, make the acousticians be the artist, make the landscape architects be the economist, because then you ask very different questions. There is no bad ideas, there are no bad questions. But when you ask different questions, you also get different answers. And it's a lot about actually how you deal with ideas. There was a research that was done from SINTEF, that is the technical university, part of the technical university in Trondheim, and they wanted to look into how idea work is. And we were only what you can call the only creative profession. So Statoil, the big oil company in Norway, a lawyer firm, a bank, a magazine, and Snøhetta. And they looked in, how do you work with ideas? Is there anything that is in common with all these different professions? And they actually figure out that there were 10 drivers that all these offices worked with when they work with ID works. And actually, some of them are like prototyping, which is easy to understand for an architect because you are prototyping, you're making models, you're getting physical. And then resistance, I think that is super important. You don't always agree about things. Maybe you have to push it even further, and it's okay to not agree, because then you have to keep on working with the project to see if you can get it a better idea. Punk production is about going much further and not stop and not say that resistance is a problem, but to really dare to do things you never have been doing. My favorite driver is absolutely liberating laughter. I think it's so important that we need to have fun together. We're spending so many hours of the day together with our colleagues, and then you need to have fun. And there's so much serious work we do in architecture. We have to be so responsible, so you need to have fun. And it's all about being generous. It's all about really going into ideas and then give more than you maybe thought of, and give more that the program, give more that the client really thinks. And the start of that is maybe going back all the way back to 1989, where it was the international open competition about the library in Alexandria. And here's the Bay of Alexandria. You could say maybe it's circular shaped, and we start to work with the circle. And the goddess of sun, Osiris, also have the circle. And at that time, the microchip was very much in going into the future, was also a circle. We work with a circular shape. This is by the ocean. And you know, when you are by the ocean, you have also the corniche and the water and how that reacts. At least it used to be the 7th largest library in the world, and very important for Alexandria. There was a big discussion about if you're going to spend so much money on making a library in a country that there's so much illiteracy, people that can't write or read, but they really did it. So this circular shape, if you are by the ocean or any water surface, you know your eye height is always, that's where the horizon is. So if you have a circular shape and you make one line, which is the horizon, the ocean, and you lay the circle there, and you then flip it, you actually bend it down, and you get one point that is present. And then you take away the other, and then you have the future going up, and you have the past. And with the history of Library Alexandria, there was such a long historical history that was part of the project, and we made it lean up into the future to last much longer than the present. So this, then the library then goes into the water, and it has a very high-tech roof, north-facing, because you shouldn't have any direct light to the books. And then it has a very low-tech wall, which consists of actually granite from Egypt. We work together with an artist and a historian to actually go into all the different languages and the letters of the different languages that should cover the whole wall. And then carve in stone, we thought that, I mean, they've been doing that for thousands and thousands of years in Egypt. So we were sure that they could still do that, because they have very good quality granite in Egypt. But they have forgotten how to dig in stone. So we had actually to take them to Norway, because we have a big stone industry in Norway. So we had actually people coming from Egypt to Norway to learn to carve in stone again. And the interesting thing was that actually this was an international project which was not so common in Egypt in the beginning of the 1990s. And they said that all the builders, they had to team up internationally and local. So then there was an Egyptian firm that actually needed to learn to carve in stone from Norwegians in a collaboration, and they learned something new that they could start to sell after we had gone. So these pieces of stone, they're 1 by 1 and 1 by 2 meters. So they're very, very large. And it sits by this pond, the waterscape, and it's actually part of the history of all languages and part of the urban context. You can just see this big stone wall, which creates a new middle ground in the city context. And also, this is not a skyscraper, it's more like a landscraper. So part of the city skyline, it doesn't stand that much out, but it's very new and contemporary compared to the others. And what was actually very, very touching for us was during the Arabic Spring, where they were really, really afraid that somebody would go in and destroy the library. We actually get updates from the library that the University of Alexandria, that it's the neighbor building of the library. The students were standing hand in hand and were actually making a fence around the library to make sure that nobody would actually destroy it. And then we could really feel that we actually managed to push the world with architecture. They had its own life, it had a true ownership in Egypt and made a big difference. Cityscapes for people. I would say 95% of the work we're doing is for human beings. So that is about how our client is. If we don't have a real client on the side, we always have a user, and in the city, it's every day. The next big commission that I'm in when we opened the library in Alexandria was 2000 to 2001. We didn't almost have anything to do. We had to lay off people. We didn't have any money. Then it was a new anonymous competition, 300 and something entries about the Norwegian opera and ballet. It had been a very large controversial in Norway for many years, if we at all should have an opera. The old opera we had was a regular theater from 1959, and everybody in the opera was complaining that it didn't work. Even if we have so much money that we made of oil and gas in Norway, a lot of Norwegians thought it was ridiculous to spend so much money to make an opera that nobody cares about. So, I mean, the notion of actually understand culture is actually pretty spoiled kids that don't really understand. So when the program came, they said that, okay, the program is an opera and a ballet, nothing else. Urban context, we do later. And this, the good thing about it was that they say the cultural project will be the first in a very large transformation downtown Oslo at the harbor area. So you can see here, I mean, it's all about traffic, big roads, and train station, and no access to the water. And you can see here where the site is, and actually, lucky for us, here is actually our office, and this is where the opera. It's very rare we're so close to construction site, but that's fantastic. And you can also see Oslo is a pretty small city, 650,000 people. It's very green and it's blue, but it has a pretty dense downtown. So what we worked with the concept was really to try to reconnect the city grid with the green frame around it. Ekeberg Hill, the small hill that is very green, and the fjord, the connection with the city and the landscape. So we said that actually the opera should slope down, and we really said right away, we know there's so many people that doesn't like that we spend money on opera, so if you don't want to go into the opera, you should be able to walk on top of the opera. So we turn the roof, the fifth facade, into a public space that should be open 24/7. And nothing should sort of be taller than the landscape, so it's only the stage tower that is taller. And then we made the curved wall that actually sits on the waterfront, and it divides the public place to actually the back where is the theater and the factory where everybody works, and we have one carpet that is make it into one object that actually is this white building. This is actually the rendering from the competition. So if any one of you are striving in 3D, you can make pretty easy 3D drawings and still win a competition. And this is how it actually then reacts back to the ocean. So it's very modest. Again, it's really going into the water and trying to explain the city and that you have the view line into the ocean and invites you in. It was a pretty complicated construction because a lot of it was built below water sea level. So it's a watertight construction. Actually, we didn't find too much of heritage or old ships that was there. So we actually were half a year early on time to finish the whole building, and it was on budget. So nobody could really complain about spending too much money on the cultural project. We had this notion that we wanted to make a white building. It has to be something extraordinary, something special. So we worked pretty hard to find the right stone. We have a lot of stone in Norway, but to find the perfect white stone that actually was resistant to all the seawater or the dust and all the traffic and everything. Actually, the researcher figured out that the Carrara marble, the opera marble from Italy, was the best one. So we worked with this sloping facade or the roof or the landscape to be almost like a landscape. So then in a landscape, you don't have any program. And that was the better part of that they didn't have a program for a public plaza, that we didn't need to program it, that you have to sit here, you have to see there, you have to throw litter there. It's an unprogrammed public plaza, which most of landscapes are. They're not programmed. And then it's all about walking on it. And Norwegian, we love to go hiking. We go på tur. We're really out walking. We like to do that and to explore. And then to make people walk around on the building. And for the project, actually for the roof, there were 3 artists, a landscape architect and architect, that worked together with this 19,000 square meters of actually then marble cladding, 33,000 individual stones. It was an extremely big puzzle to make. And all these different slopes that actually made people to walk differently up there. And then, of course, there was a question about how do you do that with if you're on a wheelchair? How do you mark the steps? Because you need a contrast color and you need maybe so people don't trip. We tested out a lot of things, you know, to mark the marble building with yellow or black. It didn't really work. And then someone come up with a very good idea. If we do all the kinks and we isolate them, these are all the kinks that are isolated in special elements, and we say, this is actually art. So the rest is actually public space. So here, just as you know, this piece, oops, sorry, that was going a little bit fast. Let me try again. This piece here, one stone, which actually then has a step. This piece is art. This piece is public plaza. And we actually came out of it. So we actually managed to do that because you don't mark art with a contrast color. Nobody would do that. And then the notion to make people go in, since there may be a lot of people would never ever think of going into the opera or see a ballet. We thought that the glass needs to be super, super clear, so you actually get a notion of getting in. So the indoor-outdoor situation there shouldn't be any threshold at all. And hopefully that people would start to get curious what's going on inside, and then have a lot of concerts, outdoor concerts, that also are for free. It's almost like all these birds sitting on the white stone. And then the most crazy thing was when Justin Bieber had a concert, and there were 10,000 screaming teenager girls and 50 men. Obviously, this is not from that concert. And then the notion of this white, and then a lot of people said, oh, is this the iceberg, the snow, or what is it? It's really about this notion of making a new way of going into the opera. And then, of course, when it snows, you have to walk on your own risk. If you go on the top, and then people, of course, are skiing and they're doing all sorts of things. And you can also even go into the water, but the accessibility to the main entrance is very, very, very gentle slope, and it's always ready to take you in there. And then, of course, there is a program inside. The National Opera has then now worked for 11 years, and they say they had a dramatic rise in visitors. It's a lot of sold out, and a lot of more people are interested in both opera and ballet, so they managed to get them in. And of course, the people walking on top are amazingly many. There are millions and millions of people. And the most touching is maybe then we got letters from people that said, I really was against this project, but I must say I love it, and I'm really going on a hike just to have a look. And you could always say that you have a walk in the city, and you also have a walk in the landscape at the same time. Walking on to a super urban project, real urban talks. It's going to Times Square. We were lucky to get the commission for the reconstruction of Times Square. It's like the most busiest, almost the most busiest place in the world. A lot of traffic, a lot of accidents, and not a pleasant place to stay, but a tourist magnet, and the New Yorkers hated it because they think it's way too crowded, they don't want to stay there. The New Yorker actually had 2 front pages what the reconstruction should be. Should it go back to what it used to be when it was a landscape, or what is this pedestrian zone that is going on? And this was a project that went over a long time. I think they did research for 20 years, and they tested out for 3 years that they closed the streets and marked it with different colors and made seating and then testing out. So they were really doing thorough research to figure out how to do it. The Duffa Plaza was already done. And the notion of that, you probably know, you have a grid, the city grid, going, and then you have the avenues going south-north, and then you have Broadway going through all Manhattan all the way. So this was from 42nd to 47th Street. And then is really Times Square a square? It's just 2 streets crossing. So there were supposed to then no traffic on Broadway, and then just south-going traffic on 7th Avenue. So we started then to work with what is a concept when you just have a horizontal level, because you shouldn't do anything with all the signs on the walls, and it's extremely busy. And at the least we had 75 millimeters that we could work on the surface. Very, very little. And they said it should be super durable, it should have millions of people walking, and it should be extremely flexible, so you shouldn't have any programming or any furniture. So our concept was actually to then mix these 2 directions on the street, that you actually have north-south and it's crossing. So that's also what we have been doing actually in the paving, with 2 scales, shades of gray, and then you have these tiny little coins that actually takes some of the light from all the commercials on the walls. I would guess that most people that walk there today, they don't really see that there's a new flooring, but they actually can walk. It's a totally different atmosphere, and there are even more people than before that is out walking. And it's a surface that is actually for people to walk, and it could be changed very easily to the yoga day or the rodeo day, or for me, much more important, make some protests, to actually have a saying, to use it as an outdoor space, to use it as a plaza, to make a public plaza that is really so open 24/7, more than any other place on earth that it's used. So with all this research, they're actually also then testing out how this was afterwards. It was open, and they figured out, of course, much less accidents, but and they have a lot of numbers to see that also actually all the restaurants and the businesses was also raising, so it was better, and even the locals started to come back to Broadway. So after closing Broadway to vehicle traffic in New York's Times Square, pedestrian injuries fell by 40% in the area, despite a 59% increase in pedestrian foot traffic. Today, 80% of visitors feel that Snøhetta's pedestrian plaza make Times Square a safer, nicer, and more New York place to be. What actually is more New York? I can't really answer that. But then this notion of this super busy, then suddenly you can just drive one direction one day, and then it's all about how people are using the area. And we managed also to make some secondary seating, where we have all the electrical things that they need for any kind of performances and events, which are 360 throughout the year. And then they have the secondary seating, where you actually can sit down, and you can get a calmer pace than actually speed when you are walking and you feel pushed. So you can sit down, you can meet new people, and you can actually stay in New York, and you can stay at Times Square. Another project which has this notion about actually a library and a public space is Ryerson University in Toronto. Actually pretty interesting. Ryerson University was not really a top-range university, but they had a library in the Young Street, which is a very central and a very long street. So the brownish beige building on the side was the library. And they wanted to make a new one, and they wanted to be shown downtown. And they said, we don't really have any program because library is in a really big change. The library that used to be, the book archive, now is different. And how do students use a library? How do they study it and how do they use it? So our task was actually to really make the program together with the client. And then we said that we wanted really to touch it back to the city to make a public place. But the site wasn't that big. But we started to work on the programming, and we said that this is more or less like a landscape. Okay, there will be some retail at the bottom. Actually, at grade, we want to get people, we want to catch them to get in to the library. So we create a valley and a bridge that is bridging back to the existing library. Then we make a bluff, a garden, the sun, the beach, the forest, and the sky. And actually, with those colors, we made a different stories. So actually the garden and the sun with the green and the orange, and then the beach, which is really the most popular area. It's a different way of having a library. It's a study area, it's a place you can work, it's a place you can meet other people, and it's much more relaxed, and you behave differently that you would do in a normal or traditional library. And also then for how you then are occupying the space. Maybe you're using it a little bit more that you would do outdoor. And then, of course, also to take that notion both at grade, where you have an auditorium, and all the way to the street level to get people to be part of the library. And they say they had a really rise in people, the students, were getting better, even better grades, and they were spending so much more time studying because they like to meet here and they like to be part of this. And even the rating for the university was even better because of the library. So then also by the urban context that people started to use it, so it was a hang-out place and also a lounge place indoor. So it also changes the way that we look into library, that it could be something different. I also want to talk a little bit about the digital and going to analog, because I think as architects, we have in, let's say, the last 20 years, have a really big change in tools. And the digitalization is super important for us in a different way to work. We can do other things, but we should never, ever forget about analog. And how do they play together? So one of those projects is actually the Wild Reindeer Centre. That was with the shapes, that is the interior of this steel box, that we have a wooden interior. I don't think we could have made that project without doing it in a 3D. It would be super or much harder to make it in a 2D plan, so we absolutely need to go 3D. And of course, we could have made a lot of physical models, but when you have a model printer, you can easily prototyping and make more and more. So that was important for us. And we also have an industrial robot in the office that we also use to excavate the model. So here is our model then made. And of course, the idea was to actually use the robot to go to the industry to make one piece, and then you could actually execute, sealing or a new prototyping for new elements. But this was an early stage for us, and it was carved out, and then we could actually send that to another firm that actually was on the west coast of Norway, then had the CNC carved out, which actually was a boat builders that made it. So this is made of 20 by 20 centimeter pine wood, and it's no glue and no nails, and it's just laid out like traditional way. No, I don't know how that is called in English. You know, when you have logs and you make the traditional way of making a house. This is made in the same way. So it is all, and then it was connected. Just get it on a trailer, all the way up to Snøhetta, to the mountain area, and then inside the steel frame. And then the exterior and the interior is the same. It's this solid wood, and it's of course weared with the weather totally differently outside when you are inside, and you have this ephemeral and very 3D model shaped, but still you have then the most important you have shelter to be indoor, and you have a fireplace so you're not getting cold, and then you have the panoramic glass that you actually can watch the wild reindeer, the wild animals that are there, and you feel secure and safe, and you can look into Snøhetta, the mountain on the other side. And then, of course, the animals that are in the real landscape, they can look back on the strange animals that are inside the glass box. This project with then actually a view to Snøhetta was very inspiring for us, and actually also is this that you can walk 1.5 kilometers even with a wheelchair, not walk but roll, so it's not too steep, and you can be in the mountain, which is also to get more people into the mountains. You don't need always to climb a peak. The strange story about this is actually these wild reindeers that are about just 2 herds back in Norway, and they actually have been traveling all the way from southern Europe. I don't know how to explain it, but we are told that actually in the caves in Lascaux, they have, as you can see, wild reindeers. Sorry, I'm not good at pointing. Wild reindeers is part of the caves in Lascaux. And then when we were opening the Wild Reindeer Centre, one of the ministers came from France because they said this is actually part of the same herds. So when they were going to make a new museum for the Lascaux caves, we were invited for the competition. Because 10,000 years ago, when we had the last ice age, the wild reindeers were really happy in Lascaux. The snow was melting. They wanted to have it colder, so they kept on walking after the snow was melting, walking all the way to Norway. Why they couldn't stay in Lascaux, I have no idea. I would stay in Provence rather to go on the top of a mountain. And they ended up at Snøhetta, and that's actually where they are. So we were invited to the competition and actually won. And this story is totally, for me, totally amazing. This is the tiny little site that is Lascaux, and here's where the original caves were, and this is the site that was for the competition. The story goes that in 1942, under the Second World War, there were 3 young guys that were out walking after a very heavy storm. So there were a lot of trees that was flipped over, and they were walking with their dog. And it was getting darker, and suddenly the dog was gone. It was like, woof, 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 woof. And they said, what happened with the dog? And then they saw a big hole in the ground because the trees were tripping over, and they saw there was a real hole, and actually went into the hole. And one of the guys had a torch, and he lit up the torch and found the cave drawings. And they were kept secret till after the war. And then they started, of course, to look into it. And then, of course, this has been sealed for a very, very long time. They say they're up to 18,000 years old. And they made a replica in the 80s. That a lot of people think that it was the original. And now they were going to make a super new replica for it. Because, of course, it can't stand. And nobody really should get touched in with the real ones. So how should we then work with conceptually to actually make a museum like this? So we looked into the landscape and made a section of the valley. You see at the bottom. This is actually the caves going into the hill. And then we were making the section through there. So we said that the caves, and of course the entry, is about going from the outdoor to the indoor, and how then to explain and show a new indoor or an outdoor to people. So we made 3 cuts in the landscape, and we said the first cut is actually vertical, and the 2 next cuts, are horizontal. So to make the facade in the foothill, and then make 2 cuts in the landscape that actually were openings that you could get outdoor again. So with this concept, we made it onto the site. Here you can then see this is actually the building on the foothill with actually the cut. And then this was the existing landscape, and this was then with a concrete building that is making the foothill and then making the new landscape that you also can walk on top of the landscape. So the section is super important in this project. How you then go from the outside, going into a cave, and then again coming into a new light, and how the transition between indoor and outdoor, and how you can walk on it and along it and inside it. So the replica is about 400 square meters and was then digitalized in the most complicated 3D model ever. They figure out the acoustics, measure that. They thought that the light inside, actually they had some sort of torches that they made of burned animal fat, and they figure out that that was about 12 lux. They figure out that the temperature used to be 12 degrees, and all that we should do in the new when you got into the caves. So all this super complicated 3D model that would never ever been able to do in another and in a 3D drawing tool that was made, and then how you then enter in and with the light and going inside the cave, and how actually we think, because of course we don't know, how actually the light hits the landscape. So I think it was 8 artists that worked for more years to actually do the paintings, and they were totally amazed how many colors that was used, how they worked with perspective, because the different geology makes it different, and some of them are almost looking at a bull coming closer to you because it's made in a nice perspective. So it's very interesting how they made it, and very complicated. And then the building of the structure, which is then also sort of the layer, but it's made in concrete, and the indoor and the outdoor, and then how the light is taken in. So the light is very important. And then how it was finished, and it sits in the landscape and on the landscape, and you can walk on top of it. And of course, the light that shines from the cave would be very interesting to show. So you invite people in, and how it then sits in just the foothill of the landscape, to me this scar that actually has been there for 18,000 years. We like to talk about what we call contextualized concepts, because we think the site really matters and how the context actually reflects back to the projects we're doing. And it's also about people and how the processes are in, together with the people, and it could be the client, could be the users, could be the program that is important for any project we're doing. And then after we won the library in Alexandria, we thought maybe we would be invited to more people in the more projects in the Middle East. But it took time. It had to wait till the library opened in 2001. People started to travel, and then in the early 2000, we were starting to get invited to a lot of Middle East competitions. And one of them was in Saudi Arabia, and it's called King Abdulaziz Centre for World Culture. The competition was in 2007, right before the big dramatic crack in economy. It's Aramco that is the client, so they are one of the world's biggest oil companies. And then, since Norway is a small oil country, we thought it was actually interesting to say, could we transfer something from Norway to Saudi Arabia? We also had a lot of discussions in the office. Can we actually work in Saudi Arabia? I mean, it's a regime. It's very hard. Can we have 50-50 men and women. Can the female go down to Saudi Arabia? What about all the gay people in the office? Will they come home? What can happen? And what can we actually do in architecture to actually make a difference in such a country where the political and the religious system is so strict? But the program was so interesting that we thought we actually could make a difference. It's one of the first libraries that are public in Saudi Arabia. Is the first public cinema in Saudi Arabia that was part of the program. So we thought the program and that we maybe could do a difference. So this was the site. Yeah, maybe not so exciting. Yeah, okay. Desert is super interesting and very exotic, specifically when you come from Norway. So our image of the project was this for the competition. Got a little bit better in 3D drawings. And this was all about this mirage. I mean, it's 70 degrees, and the only thing, I mean, it was hot here today, but this is much hotter. And it's dry, there is no rain. You're walking in the desert, and you are so thirsty, you're going to die, and you see this big mirage, and you want, there must be some water, and of course it goes away. That will never, ever happen. But they chose us. They wanted our project, and they even wanted to build it. It was totally shocking. We work with what we have been working a lot of project, past, present, and future. You can take that for any project. Here it was all about really to accumulate the knowledge. I mean, Aramco was 70 years. That in 1932 they found the first oil well. So that was really about building up the country. And then it's a lot about technology and interaction. And they said that they really want to have dialogue. And we thought that was super interesting and something that also we should show in the architecture. And then what about the future? It has to change. We can't just keep on pumping up the oil. And how can that also be reflected back in the project? So since the program had all these different kind of specific programs with a great hall, there was the museum, it was the library, it was a children's discovery zone. So we said that it's so large, the whole building is 100,000 square meters, and we said that it's almost like pebbles in the sand, and we make them together, and we have a keystone. You need the keystone to make the arch, or it will all fall apart. And this is also about the knowledge and the interaction they have. So that was our, and then actually there's also a geological phenomenon in Saudi that almost looked like these stones. So that's what we took from the site. So there were two things that told us when we won the competition. We really, really liked the project, but we're going to extend it and we do a lot of different things. But there's one thing. We don't like the facade. The polished steel thing, we don't like that. One of the people high up in the organization said that I want it to be black, polished granite. And we were like, no. It will not be a grave tomb. We have to come up with something different. And we were searching quite a lot to try to, how do we actually make this facade? And after a lot of testing, we actually looked into the landscape. They are pumping up the oil and they're piping the oil through the landscape, and we thought maybe we can use pipes. So we're starting to look into these pebbles that each had a program, and with steel, if anybody of you have been knitting, you know when you have the yarn, you do this when you have your yarn. This was done in the same way. Each pebble has its own personality, and when we're opening, we start from the opening and we do the pipe. So actually the pipes, and we tested it out, we love to test out things one-to-one, specifically the things we never done before, like this, never ever done that before. And since most of the program doesn't really need daylight, and it's super hot, we can have a lot of the program below grade in the sand, because then it would be better. And then if there was a window, and we needed a window opening, the pipes are 76 millimeter in diameter. If you have a window, inside, you squish them down to 12 millimeters, so we get opening. And then you filter the light, and you can see that there is an opening in behind. And then this super complicated 3D model was then Seele, a Swiss and Austrian firm, that actually made it so the tubes are made from the 3D model in the precision that only a Swiss firm can do. And it's all excavated, and you've got these patterns. This is actually for real. It's not just a model. From the testing outside the office, the different sorts of pipes. And then there was another thing that said, this was also one of our renderings. We thought that these stones were just landing in the desert, very, very beautiful and very exotic. And they say, we hate the desert. You have to come up with something better. They can't just be in the existing desert landscape. Part of it's already an oil museum there, and they already had a big garden. So instead of then making, half of it, we made a new landscape, and the rest, we said that should be actually a desert landscape. So the lush garden, we extended double size, and then we called the monosurface the desert garden. And I would say the most important with this project is actually that it's one entrance. So men and women walk into the same entrance. It's just that you have the auditorium without a wall in the middle. The client said, we want to make a change. We're not going to build a wall. Just to have a discussion about where can we have the toilets. They said, no, female and male should not have toilets at the same level. So we ended up with it's one entrance and they depart like we usually do all other places. This is a huge difference in a country like Saudi Arabia. So for the landscape, we thought we still really love the desert. So we were very inspired by that, and we thought all the geology, which is part of the history and where they've actually found the oil, because that's where they pump up the oil. So the ripples of the sand with all kinds of different of geology, and then actually try to just use water-resistant plants that belongs to the desert, because the water reserve is as crucial as the oil. You pump it up and you never get it back. It's not renewable. So they have to rethink how they use the water. And then also we said that actually we have some really nice sand on site, and we made rammed earth walls. They were super skeptical to that. No, but that's just for poor people. And we said, no, this is exactly what you have, and it's part of your history, and it's part of the culture to make that in a new way, to make this beautiful sand go into a new structure. So it's very much part of the past. So the really tall, the entrance arcade with then the rammed earth wall on the back goes up to 6 meters. From the site, it's not transported. A lot of other things they buy from all over the world. And even for the new light on the landscape should just be solar panels. I mean, they have a lot of sun. They should use it. They are an oil company, but then invest into how to use solar power. So all of these, not the biggest gestures, but it's part of the future thinking. So here on the left side of the building is Fuad. He and 4 of his colleagues were in the Oslo office for a year, and also Fatma, a female interior designer. They were part of our team in Oslo, and when they left, they said, we didn't think we could work in such an open area, like everything is sharing in Snøhetta. We would really like to try to bring this back to the construction site in Saudi Arabia. And then it's Leila on the other side, one of our female architects that was actually on construction site for more years working in Saudi Arabia. This is partially before it was all finished. It's a very, very large project, and even then with some cactus, and I mean a totally new atmosphere, and the big piped buildings on the back. And of course, I could have showed a lot of images of this project. It opened last year. It has in the Great Hall, it has 2 exhibitions, and we have been lucky to make a new exhibition that opened yesterday in Saudi Arabia about Edvard Munch, our most famous painter from Norway that you probably know. The Cry. Ah, yeah, he made that one. It's now in Saudi Arabia. It was a big controversy. And I mean, just to have, I think these are also the official images that I managed to get. And just this, because I mean, he was a lonely and pretty desperate painter. He had a lot of psychological problems and had a very dark personality, but also an amazing artist. And just one of 5 themes was then loneliness. And this image to the right, where you have a female in her abaya and looking at the still controversial paintings in Saudi Arabia. And it's the first, what I'm told, the first figurative art exhibition ever in Saudi Arabia that is public. And then it feels like actually it helps manage to move the world a little bit with architecture, even in such a regime and a place. And it's possible, even this thin line of the image of the boxes we made is a thin line, what is political and what is architecture. and what is a behavior, and it's all about people. And I think that is really interesting. Okay. Now we're going to talk about some smaller projects, local, global. We can say that everything is global today, but still have to go back to the local, to the site and the context. And I really mean that site matters, and I think that's what Snøhetta we work a lot with. What is the site and what can it contribute with? And then you can maybe say there is something about this Nordic. We started in Norway. There were from day one people from all over the world, not all over the world, but from Czech Republic, from the US, from Austria. It was not just Norwegian. And the base in this social democracy and the Nordic feeling, but of course the landscape and the nature is really important. Maybe also is in flavor, and this working in teams and that everybody should be equal is important for us. This project is in northern Norway and it's in a totally amazing, beautiful landscape. The mountain chain is called the Seven Sisters because there are 7 mountain peaks. And at one end, there is a museum that is called Petter Dass Museum. He was a bishop that lived from 1647 to 1707, the Norwegian Baroque. For the 300th anniversary, they wanted to make a museum for Petter Dass, and they had a site that they had been fighting for 20 years, so it should be there. We tested out 2 different projects, and we didn't really make it work because we thought it was not positioned the right way, because we had a really beautiful mountain, we had the cultural landscape, we had the old church, and we thought that the project should be the last thing you should see. So you should discover everything else. So we found one little place in the landscape that we thought was much more interesting. So we looked into the landscape. It was a little dip. We actually cut it out with wire saw, and then I redefined the landscape. It was the Baroque, so everything is hell and heaven. So it's really dramatic, and he also was very dramatic. So we wanted the building actually to float over, and that the landscape should flow through. The front of the building should not be bigger than the small farm buildings on side. So the church should be the most important. So we made a cut in the landscape and then redefined it. I put a building in it. It's gneiss. It's a geological stone that almost goes over to be marble. So it's a lot of marble in the area. So we have actually a marble gravel on the flooring. And then, of course, you get things like this, which you never could plan for. You have a little water and suddenly you have moss. I mean, you can't plan for that. That's what nature gives back to you. And then, of course, when it rains, you don't really know what is reality and what is a reflection, what is actually glass and what is stone. And it's also about reflecting about the important thing in life. And you have this cantilever building that comes in. You can enter, and you have this beautiful view of the landscape, and also with, I mean, the beautiful light during summer that really are special in the northern part of Norway. And this little intervention that is very different, but still talks about the past and what the whole nature and the cultural landscape has given this place. And then on one side, you can pass through. On the other side, there's a stairway. If that goes to hell or to heaven, you have to go up there to check it out. Another small project also in the northern part, this is the northern part of Sweden. It was called the 7th Room, and it's in a pine forest. It's really, really up in the north. And we were asked by Kent and Britta, these 2 people. He is a fireman. She wanted to make a bed and breakfast. And she bought an old building and started a bed and breakfast, and nobody stopped. So there were no customers because this is so far off. And I think the closest place, there lived 70 people. So they had a friend that was actually making a film about a tree house. And they made a tree house. And then Ken thought, maybe it could be interesting. Maybe people rather would stay in a tree house than in the bed and breakfast. So he's a fly fisher. So we had 3 friends that are architects. And they were fishing together. And he said, now I have this idea about making a house in a tree. And I was wondering if you architects, my friends, would you be interested in that? And come on, all architects want to make a small building in a tree. I mean, that's like a children's dream, to have your own little building up in the tree, and you can be alone. You can escape from the world. So they made made that actually 6 different projects. And the conditions are plus 30, it actually gets really hot in the summer, and minus 40 in the winter. And totally dark in the middle, and very light with the northern lights in the summer. So the 6 existing buildings, some of them, I mean, they're tiny, they're super cute, and they got great personalities. I mean, like the nest and the UFO. I mean, the nest, I just have to tell this because it's amazing. You just see the nest up in the air, 5 meters up, and you go to the trunk of a tree, and then you see this little white button, and then you push the button, and then suddenly you see from the nest, me, comes down like a door, and then this goes down all the way, and you can escape up there. Totally amazing. So we thought, no, actually, there are all these great personalities. We're going to make a new, and it actually should have 2 bedrooms. All the others have 1. And we thought it's just going to be a little house. It's almost like a monopoly house. I mean, the easiest way to make a house. And really, we were inspired by the farmer house that is actually just a cover. But where should be it situated? It should be in the tree crowns. It should be lifted out. It should be totally different from the other ones. So we wanted to keep all the trees and lift it up and have a tree go through. First, we actually wanted to have a lift that went all the way, so it was almost like going to an outdoor toilet, and then have a lift to go all the way up. But we need a fire escape, so we needed to have a stair. So we needed to have a stair to go all the way up. So the cabin is all up there. And it was built on site. So we have 14 columns drilled into the surface. And then it was built there. All it's wood, local workers. And then we had to raise it up. And then we actually also had to make a balcony. They asked us for that. So we just had to raise it up with 2 cranes. And then we suddenly didn't have the 5th facade, but the 6th. We had something underneath the building. So we had a photographer to take a photo of the tree crowns from grade, looking up before we did build anything. And then we made that into aluminum sheets, printed the photo, so it's all covered underneath. So when you walk underneath, it disappears. And then you have the one big trunk that goes through. And then there is a net, you can go up, and we lift it up 10 meters. So the outer balcony is a double net that you can go out, and you can have a sleeping bag and stay overnight, 10 meters above then. And then you have this Nordic, birch interior and ash. And then you just have this black building that actually is burned wood. Like the Japanese technique that you just burn the surface and oil on top, then there's no more maintenance. It takes care of itself. It's kind of hard to get up there. And then we even for the northern light and have then the forest underneath. So we had the 6th facade before, because the 5th facade is sold last year. And we go out in the forest, and it's just a tiny, tiny intervention, and it's actually just punctuating the ground on 14 small parts, and the rest is lifted up. And the good thing about being 10 meters above ground, because it's a lot of mosquitoes in the summer, they don't fly that high. So then you're above them. The last project, it's now we have doing this preposition thing. We're walking on top of, we are underneath the building, we are through, we are piercing, now we're going under. The under restaurant was a request for 2 brothers that had a hotel, this hotel over here, that they had bought. I think it's just built 10 years ago, and they bought it like 4 years ago. It's not really a specifically nice hotel, but they had this idea, we want to make an underwater restaurant. And we were like, okay. Yes, we can work on that. That sounds fun. And we went to the space, and they said they wanted it to be very close to the hotel, because the kitchen should be in here. And this is a pretty rough key area, so it was not really so nice. We tested it out, more concept, didn't really make it work, and we were like more and more frustrated. And then the only thing we should not change, the site should be exactly where it is. In the end, we had a real discussion and said, is it possible to actually look into a different site? And when they said yes, we managed to make the project. So this is on the southern part of Norway. Again, a tiny, tiny place. I think there lives like 2,000 people in the community, and it's a living harbor. So it's a lot of fishermen that actually comes with fresh fish. And then we had it on the other side of the bay, and we made it like a concrete tube that we then sat down into the water. So it's not sinking, but it's coming up. It's like a tube. Then it's 6 meters below the water, and then the whole thing is of concrete, and then we just have like one bridge bridging back to land. It's 2 floors, and this was the renderings that was made for this tube. It's almost like this big whale that is going underneath the water. From the beginning, the 2 brothers said that we want to make an excellent restaurant, a really high-class restaurant, but we also work together with researchers that do maritime research. There is the one guy from the university on the southern part of Norway. He works with how to look into reconstruct underwater landscapes. How can you make new nests and homes for fish? How can you train fish with light, give them food, give them different atmospheres and environment to see if they react on it? So that was part of the project. It should be a research project. So they actually also got it with quite a lot of money. So the research should be done before the construction, under the construction, and after. So that was part of the whole thing, to show actually how the maritime life would do. So this was the rendering, and this is after it was built. This is also the very dramatic rendering. And it's actually pretty tough weather there. Sometimes the waves will go over the building, and you actually have to be careful to walk, even if it's just 200 meters from the hotel to the restaurant. You have to be careful because it's really, really rough sea. And then, of course, it can be nicer and calm sea. And it has a fantastic flora underneath the water. It has all these different seaweeds and a lot of fish. And then this also from the rendering of the restaurant. And then how it actually is when it's opened. And you go into this underworld you are inside the deep of the sea. And then also here is making the tables. And then it was actually built on site, constructed on site, all the concrete work on the one side of the bay. And then it was with a big crane again, this time with a boat, just transported over the bay to be on the right side. You have some locals that want to see how this is going. And the kids are really, this was last summer. It was actually in July. Then we got the building over and the foundation below grade, and then also again checking how the underwater landscape was taking in, and the fish. And then under construction is 30 centimeter acrylic, and it's 11 meter wide. Got this like very, very large TV screen. And then starting to actually look at the fish. And even we got the possibility to design all the furnitures, and it's locally made by local carpenters, and also with a specifically acoustic ceiling that's made together with Kvadrat. And then this is also one of the renderings, how it will be for the fish, to look back on these strange things going in there. And there are more people diving to have how it look like it is there. So that was actually the last project. And this is Snøhetta on hiking. This was 3 years ago. Then we went to a high mountain, which is much higher in Austria than it is in Norway. So we had found another mountain in Innsbruck. And it's really important for us to have this notion that we're not named after anyone. We're actually named after a landscape and a brown bar. And it's all about the people that work there, and all about really trying to push the world with architecture, because it's really important, our contribution to how actually the environment will look, and how it actually, everybody in their everyday life, how they affect us. So we have important task that they have to fulfill, and it should stay for a very, very long time, but should never forget to have fun when you're working and really have fun with your colleagues and try to push the world with architecture and actually look into the future to see if you can make a place that actually makes a difference. Thank you.
Takk, Jenny. To start Norwegian. In Norwegian, so I was constantly thinking, is it a marathon or is it a sprint? So thank you very much for both. Thank you very much to our interpreters. I think it had to be a difficult job to, you know, to follow Jenny's.
I feel very sorry for them. I mean,
but
thanks a lot.
And would like to invite you to ask anything.
Any questions, or are you just totally exhausted?
And I have prepared one. Can you give us some samples of your future projects? Are there anything which is, you know, under preparation?
I mean, we are a lot of projects that are under constructions, and I think what would be really interesting to see when we start to get a little bit longer into the project that we are doing a new opera in Shanghai, because also to work in Asia has been a big challenge for us, and we think it would be really, really interesting to see how that will be when it's executed. We just come to sketch design and go on to detail design. It's a much larger opera that in Oslo, but I think also with the pace in China, it can be a very interesting challenge for us.
That's very true. But congratulations, I mean, to the great first prize in that competition in Shanghai. So any other questions? Actually, Snøhetta is also working on different scales. I mean, you are also well known for your product design or the banknotes, the Norwegian banknotes and so on. So I think it's also very kind of interesting aspect of your work, that you are not only concentrating on designing houses, landscape, but you also go into much smaller scale. I think that's probably important to mention as well.
I probably already talked way too long, but it was hard to choose which project, and I could have shown a lot more projects, but I had to do some choices. So, but is there any? If there are any questions or anything, you probably there's a question.
And there is a microphone coming.
Yeah.
Hello. Thanks for the talk. It was amazing. And I have a question which is slightly off topic. But you mentioned you have these teams distributed all around the world. And I wanted to ask how you guys manage to collaborate on projects when one team is in, let's say, Australia and the other one is in Oslo. Which tools you use and which processes?
Of course, the new offices we make, we try to have somebody from sort of the mother office to start up. So both know how we work, and then also it's really important how we pick people. So also there's an understanding, it's not my idea, it's the collective idea, because that can be hard for some to understand that we actually truly are working in teams. And of course and since we are relying on the teams that they decide, we also give that away to when we start up new offices. And of course they're not the same, they have to be different in different countries, and we're not too afraid of that. And of course, we try then to connect back. So when we're doing our hike, we also have like a 2-day session that we work together. And then, of course, for some, it's quite a lot of traveling to have workshops. It's easier when, like for Oslo and Innsbruck and Paris, then we do quite a lot of workshops that we go, either they come to Oslo or the other way. And then, of course, then it's actually the close collaboration is between Adelaide and Hong Kong, even that is a long stretch. So we have to rely on people. That's why also we think it's really important to when we hire people, that we have a thorough interview to actually know that they want to contribute and they want to share their ideas.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Please, there.
Yeah, thank you for the talk. It was amazing. I would just like to ask, since you have different offices in different parts of the world, do you ever collaborate remotely? And I have a follow-up question with how big your teams usually are for these projects.
To start off with the first one, it really depends on the size of the project. For the biggest ever that I've been working on was the King Abdulaziz, the Saudi Arabian project. The most, we were 53 people because it was super large and was in an extremely high speed. I would say for a startup in a competition, between 3 and 5 people is normal. Like for the Oslo Opera, the max I think was 20 people on that team. So it depends, of course, of the size and the speed of and the phasing of the project. But of course, when it gets as big as 20 people, you also have to divide it into smaller groups, and you maybe have back of house and front of house and different things like that. And we actually don't have like a production team and a competition team. It really, I mean, if you work on a project that lasts more years, then of course you are sort of stuck on that project. But most of the time we really try to have people work on competitions over and over again, because it's also about, yeah, it's important to work with the concept. So we don't really have people that just are doing this or just are doing that. For remote working, yes, and like for the Shanghai Opera now, we have most of the team actually in Oslo, but then like 4 people in Shanghai. And then of course you can say that they could work before we get up in the morning, and then we can keep on working and then give it over to them. And then it's of course about having a cloud to have all the, or a server that actually everybody can act into. And I think that also is from a lot of other projects we're doing, not only internally in Snøhetta, but with the engineers or local architects, because we always work with local architects. It could be anything from language, culture, and regulations that are needed. And then also it's important to actually do the collaboration, so we're not always sitting together. I think that's actually extremely hard when you're doing a lot of international projects.
Thank you.
Which reminded me actually of the competition for Alexandrian Library. It was also working both from Oslo and from, was it Los Angeles?
Yes, I mean the competition was strangely enough made in made in Los Angeles. They moved to Los Angeles for 6 weeks to do the competition, and then most of it was done after they got the contract in Oslo, and then it was 12 people that was for a year in Cairo, together with an Egyptian firm, a consortium, to do most of the project, and then actually did the bid back in Norway again.
That's right. So, I can see all of you are probably tired by the weather, which was today, not of your lecture. And so I'd like probably to thank Jenny in the first place, to Kemp for organizing it, and also to all of you for coming and spending this beautiful night together with us, or evening, better to say. So thank you very much, and hope to see you soon back in Prague.
Thank you for coming. Thanks for your attention.